Get inside, get what we need.
And this is this week's Closet Classic.
He really could sway and swing. They called him the rock and roll king, yeah. And when he used to wiggle his hips, the girls did a back over flip. But now he is gone. His music plays on and on. Elvis, he would never stop. Till he made it to the top. Elvis, may God rest his soul. He was the king of the rock and roll. They called him the king of the rock and roll.
We're here at the National Heritage Museum in Lexington, Massachusetts, where an exhibit entitled Artist to Icon is taking place. Some breathtaking black and white photographs of the early years of music legends Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and Bob Dylan. Hi, I'm Richie Sarno, and thank you for joining us. And I'd like to take you on a tour of these photographs here at the National Heritage Museum. Elvis listens to Don't Be Cruel with his high school sweetheart Barbara Hearn in the living room of his parents' home in Memphis, Tennessee, July 4th, 1956. Photographed by Alfred Wertheimer. Elvis Presley in performance, the Dorsey Brothers Stage Show, New York, New York, March 17, 1956. Wertheimer had never heard of Elvis before this photo shoot, but his initial impression was he had a good voice, and with some more experience, I figured he could develop into a pretty good singer. Elvis Presley performs Blue Suede Shoes, the Dorsey Brothers Stage Show, New York, March 17, 1956. Beginning in January 1956, the Dorsey Brothers show featured Elvis 6 times. These televised performances greatly increased his audience and caused a national controversy over his startling, hip-shaking gyrations. Elvis signs autographs for his fans outside CBS Television Studio 50 prior to his performance on the Dorsey Brothers Stage Show, New York, March 17, 1956. Elvis rehearses Hound Dog for his appearance on The Steve Allen Show, June 29, 1956. This was Elvis's first televised appearance after his controversial performance on The Milton Berle Show, which drew protests for what some considered his indecent behavior. Elvis appeared on The Allen Show dressed in a tuxedo to sing Hound Dog to a real basset hound. This subdued rendition was inspired by the program's demand that Elvis abandon his gyrating hip movement. Elvis backstage, New York, 1956. Wertheimer titled this photo First Arrival. He captured Elvis playing a favorite spiritual prior to a rehearsal for the Steve Allen Show. When Elvis embodied rock's sexual magnetism, he was also deeply devoted to his Southern upbringing, which included singing gospel songs in church. Elvis in performance, Rushwood Stadium, Memphis, Tennessee, July 4th, 1956. After the pressures of New York, Elvis was relieved to return to the adulation of a hometown crowd. Wertheimer recalls Elvis introduced himself to the audience and said, "Tonight you're going to see what the real Elvis is all about." He belted out the songs, he moved around on stage, he wiggled his hips, and everyone was so happy. Elvis Presley and Band, RCA Victor Studio 1, New York, July 2nd, 1956. Elvis recorded 3 songs that day, Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, and Any Way You Want Me. The first 2 were released as a single that became one of the most successful records in pop music history. Elvis Presley records Hound Dog, RCA Victor Studios, New York, July 2nd, 1956. Wertheimer was impressed with the intensity that Elvis injected into the recording session. He had his hand in back of his head and was shrieking into the microphone and gave it all he had. Elvis listens to the playback of the song Any Way You Want Me, RCA Victor Studio 1, New York, July 2nd, 1956. Elvis Presley and his band, Pennsylvania Station, New York, July 3rd, 1956. Even with his rising celebrity, Elvis and his band waited in the Grand Concourse without attracting much attention. Wertheimer was not on assignment for the trip south. Traveling with Elvis was my idea. I put up my own money, and there was only one reason I did that, because I didn't understand what made the girls cry. That's such a deep emotion. Elvis Presley at the train stop, Sheffield, Alabama, July 4th, 1956. Elvis awaits his lunch order. Even though Elvis was on the verge of fame, he stood in line just like any other person. John Lennon, Hamburg, 1961. Jurgen Vollmer used a long exposure to create the motion effect as Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Stuart Sutcliffe walked by. Lennon later used this as the cover image of his 1975 album, Rock and Roll. The Beatles from left to right, Pete Best, George Harrison, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Stuart Sutcliffe. Der Dom Fairgrounds, Hamburg, fall 1960. Astrid Kircher positioned the band in front of a huge Haas roller coaster transport truck. Photographed by Astrid Kircher. Paul McCartney with Stuart Sutcliffe in the background, Hamburg, fall 1960. Kircher used the same setting to photograph Paul and John, two young rockers who went on to become the most famous songwriting duo in the world. John Lennon and George Harrison, Hamburg, 1962. This photograph was taken in Stuart Sutcliffe's studio shortly after his death, when John and George came to pay their respects. John Lennon with Stuart Sutcliffe in background, Hamburg, fall 1960. Kircher was aware of Lennon's rebellious image, but in this photograph she wanted people to be able to see the tenderness behind his public persona. George Harrison on a train during the filming of A Hard Day's Night, London, March 1964. Photographed by Max Scheller. Fans outside the Cavern Club, Liverpool, March 1964. The Cavern Club was a small basement venue on Matthew Street in Liverpool, the scene of regular Beatles shows from 1960 to 63. Hundreds of teenagers supported the many Beatles-inspired bands that played there. Photographed by Max Scheller. Astrid Kircher and fans outside the Cavern Club, Liverpool, March 1964. Kircher traveled to Liverpool with Max Scheller, photographer for the German publication Stern. The Beatles on the set of A Hard Day's Night, London, March 1964. Capitalizing on the Beatles' controversial haircuts, this publicity picture shows the Fab Four being groomed by models appearing in the film. The model standing behind George Harrison is Pattie Boyd. Harrison married her a few years later. Beatles fan, Liverpool, March 1964. Scheller photographed this Beatles fan and her homemade shrine. Harold and Louise Harrison at home with Astrid Kircher, Liverpool, March 1964. George Harrison, the youngest Beatle, turned 21 on February 25th. The Harrisons celebrated their son's birthday without him because he was in London filming A Hard Day's Night. Hesse's Music Center, Liverpool, March 1964. Frank Hesse's was the music shop in Liverpool. John and George purchased their first guitars there and frequented the shop during the time they played the nearby Cavern Club. Les Cartledge and an unidentified man in Liverpool, March 1964. Kircher met 13-year-old Les Cartledge while photographing bands at an afternoon show at the Cabin Club. He played guitar for a local band, Arrow and Archers, and imitated the appearance of the Beatles. Bob Dylan poses with camera, Woodstock, New York, 1965, photographed by Daniel Kramer. Bob Dylan and his road manager, Victor Maymudes, backstage before the concert, Town Hall, Philadelphia, September 1964. This was the first of many Dylan shows that Daniel Kramer photographed. Bob Dylan in his apartment, New York, 1965. 20 years later, Dylan used this image on the jacket of his retrospective album, Biograph. Bob Dylan and 4 studio musicians during the Bringing It All Back Home recording sessions. Columbia Records, Studio A, New York, January 14, 1965. Bringing It All Back Home features one side of acoustic music and one side of Dylan's experimental electrified rock. Dylan plays electric guitar during the recording session for Like a Rolling Stone from Highway 61 Revisited, Columbia Records, Studio A, New York, June 16, 1965. Bob Dylan during a recording session for Bringing It All Back Home, Columbia Records, Studio A, New York, 1965. While the guitar was his primary instrument, Daniel Kramer was impressed with Dylan's proficiency at the piano. Bob Dylan during a pre-show sound check, Town Hall, Philadelphia, PA, September 1964. Bob Dylan and Joan Baez in performance, New Haven Arena, Connecticut, March 6, 1965. Daniel Kramer titled this image, Crossed Lights. Dylan in performance, Princeton, New Jersey, September 1964. Bob Dylan and his band during a sound check, Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, Queens, New York, August 28, 1965. The band was comprised of keyboardist Al Cooper, guitarist Robbie Robertson, bassist Harvey Brooks, and drummer Levon Helm. Bob Dylan plays electric guitar during a sound check, Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, Queens, New York, 1965. Forest Hills was the kickoff show for a world tour, a chance for Dylan to showcase his new sound. Bob Dylan in performance, Philharmonic Hall, Lincoln Center, New York, October 31st, 1964. Daniel Kramer was initially assigned to the press box, but Dylan refused to start until Kramer was allowed access to the stage. Bob Dylan playing piano before the concert, Town Hall, Philadelphia, PA, September 1964. Bob Dylan in performance, Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, Queens, New York, August 28, 1965. Besides the short electric set at the Newport Folk Festival a month before, this was the first time the world had seen Dylan playing rock and roll. Some die-hard fans responded with boos and chants of "We want Dylan." Similar confrontations occurred throughout the tour. Bob Dylan, Robbie Robertson, and Al Cooper review set list before the show, Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, Queens, New York, August 28, 1965. Playing electric in public for only the second time, Dylan warned the band to be ready for anything. Bob Dylan from the Highway 61 Revisited cover photo session, 1965. After reviewing the hundreds of prints taken that day, Dylan chose one of only 2 personal photographs of the Highway 61 revisited jacket. This photograph is the alternate shot. Well, this concludes the tour of the photographs of the early years of Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and Bob Dylan. I'm Richie Sarno, and thank you for joining us here at the National Heritage Museum in Lexington, Massachusetts. Please come and visit the museum again for many other fine exhibits that they have on display.
He is gone. His music plays on and on. Elvis, he would never stop. Elvis, until he made it to the top. Elvis, may God rest his soul. He was the king of the rock and roll. They call him the king of the rock and roll. Yeah, no one can ever replace the lonely and empty space. For years to come, they'll sing his name in the Music Hall of Fame. But now he is gone. His music plays on and on. Elvis, who sang the blue suede shoe. Elvis, he had to pay his due. Elvis, may God rest his soul. He was the king of the rock and roll. They called him the king of the rock and roll. King of the rock and roll.
Mother's crying again. Mother's crying again, y'all. Sure, you got poor mother crying again. Let me tell you one thing. Mother's little boy took a walk last night. He ran into a gang of corner. They had a terrible fight. When he brought mother's little boy back bed the next day, with a gang on the corner blew her only child away. You got mother crying again. All over the world, children's got their mother crying again. Lord knows you got poor mother crying again. Listen to me now. You got mother crying again.
Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Winston, just one more inning, Grandma.
Ever notice how many things today kids can do without actually moving? A whole lot of things their parents used to do the hard way. So many kids' activities today seem to leave out the activity part, which makes exercise even more important for children. In fact, new research tells us the best time to enhance bone development is during childhood and adolescence. And just getting children to walk an extra 35 minutes a day could spare them the pain of thinning bones later in life. Healthy bones come from healthy habits. Encourage your kids to get up, get out, and get moving.
Hello.
Hey, Grandma, how about another grape soda?
For more advice on how kids can build strong bones, visit AAOS.org, a public service message from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons.
Hey, hey!
Excuse me.
Your local library has all the information you need, and some you don't.
child, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. Do good. Mentor a child. Call 1-877-BE-A-MENTOR.